The Cuban Missile Crisis happened during the Cold War and was one of the most important events to happen, even if it was relatively short compared to other events. But why was it so important, you ask? Well, first off, we're going to be talking about our major players before getting into the actual, Cuban Missile Crisis itself. So, who was Fidel Castro? Fidel Castro was a Cuban born in August 13th, 1926, who later became a revolutionary and a major player in the Cuban Revolution. He had help removing the dictator Fulgencio Batista, which did succeed, and he did get removed from power, which then placed Fidel in power because he was kind of like the leader of the revolution at the time. After the revolution, Fidel Castro served as president all the way through the Cuban Missile Crisis to 2008, in which he would step down and his brother would take office after him. He later died in 2016 at the age of 90. The next major player was Nikita Khrushchev, who was in cahoots with Fidel Castro during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he had agreed to place nukes in Cuba as retaliation for the US placing nukes in Turkey. Our next major player is John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, and another major player of the Cuban Missile Crisis. JFK's handling of the Bay of Pigs directly affected the Cuban Missile Crisis, as the Bay of Pigs was, in the eyes of the public, a huge failure and had lost JFK a lot of respect. This did teach JFK that he would have to be a little more self-reliant and not rely on his advisors as much. Okay, so how did the Cuban Missile Crisis itself start? Well, it started when the United States was flying these spy planes over Cuba and discovered that they had been building sites for nuclear missiles. Now, the United States wasn't very fond of the idea of Cuba having missiles because they're communist, and they're extremely close to us, making us a very easy target if they wanted to attack us. So JFK got his closest advisors together and asked them what to do. Some said they should just full-on airstrike it, blow up the missiles, and then invade Cuba, while others favored a more passive just warning to Cuba. But JFK settled on a middle ground, which he would blockade Cuba from the outside world, stopping all trade, and then contact Khrushchev, saying that the nukes were not allowed to be in Cuba, and demanded that they be dismantled. Russia would then respond to these blockades by saying they were an act of aggression, and that the ships that were bound for Cuba were ordered to proceed. Some ships did turn back when they got to the blockade, but others were stopped by the United States naval forces, but they didn't contain any offensive weapons, so they were allowed to go through. The United States kept running spy planes over Cuba and was noting that the missiles were getting closer and closer to completion. So US forces were placed at DEFCON 2, which meant war was basically inevitable. JFK was told by his advisors that if they didn't attack Cuba now, then a nuclear war would just break out. But JFK decided to still try this more diplomatic solution with Russia. However, it had basically reached a standstill. No one was getting anywhere. However, a man named John Scaly, an ABC News correspondent, did report to the White House that a Soviet agent did contact him, saying that an agreement could be reached between the United States and the Soviets. That if the Soviets did remove the missiles from Cuba, the United States could not invade the island. The White House couldn't just believe him, so they did have to confirm what he was saying, while JFK was still in contact with Khrushchev, sending a letter that basically said, if we're not going to blow up the world, if there's no intention to blow up the world, then let's just relax, because we don't want to accidentally do that. The very next day, Khrushchev sent back a letter that said, any deal must include the removal of the missiles from Turkey. On the same day, a U-2 spy jet was shot down over Cuba, so Kennedy's advisors were very prepared for an attack on Cuba, and were searching for any reason not to. JFK then sent a letter proposing ideas to remove the nuke from Cuba to the Russian leader. JFK's brother Robert met with a Soviet ambassador secretly, and basically told him that they were going to remove the missiles from Turkey really soon anyway, but this couldn't be, you couldn't say this publicly. After this, Khrushchev did say publicly that he was going to dismantle and remove the nukes from Cuba. While total atomic annihilation was prevented, the blockade was still there until the Soviets would remove their bombers from Cuba. And on November 20th, the blockade was ended, and the United States removed the missiles in Turkey in 1963. This was a huge success for the United States. It made JFK look super grand, like his plan worked and there was no bloodshed. So all in all, the Cuban Missile Crisis, while a tense 13-day standoff between the United States and Russia, did lead to a start of the de-escalation of the Cold War and made everyone see that nuking each other won't solve any problems.